about a half an hour ago, I had a few moments of concern, thinking I was going to have to try and figure out how to give a talk with a bit of squirming and unsettledness going on with the kids who were here. But compassion prevailed, and I guess their mom took them away for a little bit of R&R. And just 5 minutes ago, out during the break, an old friend, Maureen, who haven't seen for, we figured out, 15 years, popped in, and we just chatted for a minute, but she reminded me of an escape fantasy I used to retain when I was a Samanera, of renting an apartment in Sebastopol and just going and being by myself and not having to deal with community, people, hierarchy, all that kind of thing. And she was just letting me know that she now actually is living in an apartment in Sebastopol. So, oh, not Sebastopol. Oh, that idea, close enough anyway. But fulfilling my fantasy of escape. But just thinking how much happens in 15 years and how many events have come and gone since then. It's kind of might sound like a little bit like a sobering theme for a few reflections today, but for some reason a confluence of talking with people over the past week or so, the theme of premature death by suicide has come up. Just a couple of days ago, got an email and then a visit from a young woman, and her partner came along as well. But her sister had just, the day before she came here, had committed suicide, depression. And of course her sister was back in Taiwan, so it wasn't local. And she was she was a meditator, practitioner, although she had not been here before. I hadn't met her before, but she was just trying to figure out how to deal with it, how to cope with it, what the ramifications, what's the best way to help her sister on her way, and then also just dealing with that unexpected, very difficult event. And it's, as we dedicated the chanting, Yatiko's brother's it's the 5th anniversary of his passing, also through suicide. And then another situation came up as well, that visiting, receiving an offering from somebody whose husband had committed suicide a number of years ago. It just seemed for some reason to be a theme that has come up recently. And it makes one reflect a lot on these kinds of situations that are very difficult and leave a lot of unanswered questions for people most of the time. And these kinds of tragedies kind of make one pause and throw up one's hand sometimes and say, why does this have to be? How do I make sense of this? I remember an old saying from Stephen Levine, particularly around the issue of suicide, that everybody's got a skeleton in their closet, but people who commit suicide leave their skeletons in other people's closets. Which I thought was an interesting reflection, just because of that whole sense of unresolved issues, the questions that come up, the doubts that come up, the constant rehashing of, sometimes what could I have done differently? Should I have done something differently? Should I have seen the signs, or medical professionals, what they should have done differently, what they didn't pick up on if they were involved. The feeling of not being able to have that last conversation. I was thinking about the woman who was visiting the other day, and the fact that her sister was halfway across the world and they hadn't seen each other for a few years, and all the conversations that she would have liked to have had before their separation. Second guessing. And the fact that there is no possibility, essentially, for resolution, at least on that kind of level of communication with the other person. That kind of resolution has been sealed off. And coming to terms with that. And it's not just suicide. There's other issues that bring up that same sense of helplessness, uncontrollability. There's a lot of life that isn't very controllable. We tend to overlook most of it, but sometimes these significant ones come and remind us of it, such that we can't avoid that realization. But things like unexpected illness, accidents. People get in accidents or have accidents of some kind and think, I should have been more careful, I should have done this differently, or what could have been done differently, the going back and rehashing and constant rewriting. If I'd done this, then this would have happened. Or, we have friends who have children who are having difficulties, and and I had a friend, I remember, just thinking back to my time in Seattle, a very good set of friends, and they adopted a baby, a just born baby, and gave it, a very good home, gave him a very good home and loving care and attention and all the things, all the requisites that were needed, education, all that. They were so happy to be able to finally adopt a child and raise one, and the kid turned out actually to be a real problem. Got involved with a lot of criminal activity, taking advantage of people, robbing old folks, very heavily into drugs, jail, all sorts of things. And they were just distraught for many years, I think, just even having to change the locks on their house so that he couldn't get back in, their child that they raised from being a baby. And that constant questioning sounds kind of cliche-ish, but it keeps coming up. It's like, what did we do wrong? Where did we go wrong? Again, that second guessing. So it's how to deal with this sense of helplessness that sometimes comes up, this lack of control. And one just has to reflect and realize, that human beings are just about capable of anything. We pride ourselves, and rightfully so, on having this ability to reflect, and we have a sense of an ability that's greater than the common animals to act in compassionate ways, and we have to rise up to those. But we also have a full set of instincts for self-protection and fear and anxiety, and those are often at the root of our emotional decisions. And the thinking mind can sometimes latch on to old habits, and that ability that we have to reflect and consider and be intelligent about things can also turn against us in terms of proliferation and obsessiveness and constant revisiting, rehashing, and not letting go on an emotional level of things that um, cause pain. So, that's the cause for the search. They say suffering can lead in two different directions. One is more suffering, if we just get caught and lost and keep wrapping ourselves around difficulties without any sense of being able to resolve. And the other possible result from suffering is the noble search to see if there is a way to relieve that suffering, which can lead to a sense of faith if one discovers a path that will lead them in that direction to the end of suffering, a sense of faith that then blossoms into a full-fledged way of dealing with problems that can turn us around, push us in the other direction. So really there's oftentimes you have to just turn back on the basics of what it is that forms a firm foundation in our life and can lead us to a place where we can reflect and consider and see if we can break some of the old patterns. And just having that sense of willingness to look at our own selves, really all the wanting to rewrite the past or the questions of what would have been different if we had done something differently, or the unfairness of situations, or the unresolvability. There's really no long-term answer to any of that except for turning inwards and developing a path that transcends all of these uncontrollable things. We can start to look at our own inner workings, our own inner obstructions, our kilesa, to see where it is that we get caught, where we get habituated, where we get into a groove that we seemingly can't get out of. What are these ways of thinking, these habits of mind, based on this wish for some sort of relief, wish for some sort of happiness, even if it's just temporary? How do we keep on getting lost in temporary solutions and ignoring the longer term solutions, looking at see what our own obstructions are, the underlying tendencies, the greed, hatred, delusion, how that manifests in our lives, where our weak points are, where our strong points are. So it's this just having nowhere to turn, really, except inward, to watch the mind and get to know it, and watch to see how we try and cope with the world, and whether it's successful or not. Because really, in the long run, there's no resolution to all the different things that the world can bring into our lives, all the difficulties or tragedies, or the successes and good times. We have control how we respond to the world around us, but we don't have that ultimate control to change circumstances that have already happened. Even just firming up our sila, our precepts, gives us a foundation to work from. If we live a pretty blameless life and take a lot of care to engage in behavior that's not harmful, that's non-harming, then just the capacity of the mind to withstand difficulties is all that much more, because we have a much cleaner, purer place with not as much confusion or regrets, just simply from living a relatively harmless life as best we can, at least without intentionally harming, by following the precepts. We often forget to reflect on that and to think about how much peace and goodness has come into the world just from one person, our own, following and holding on to a moral life, particularly in this world where it's so hard to do. All the messages are pointing in the opposite direction. So I think, in my mind anyway, it has all that much more effect when we're able to do it as cleanly as we can. And to reflect on that and to let that space open up in the mind that understands the power of that virtue and the power of good intention. And then sometimes with that reflection, the space opens up to let go of that need to try and understand, figure out, resolve the unresolvable. Just in that space of a wholesome citta, wholesome mind, kusala citta. A lot can be accepted in that space that's established through virtue and self-examination, that constant willingness to look at our own states of mind and see how we obstruct ourselves, and to gradually work on letting go. And in those circumstances that just seem completely bizarre and uncontrollable, and the why does this have to happen kind of question, what did I do wrong kind of question, what should I have done differently? Just to, I find often when I'm in those kinds of situations, just to ask, if I can remember, to ask myself the question of, well, what's the truth right now? What is the truth right here and now? And just to not try and paste over anything, but to be able to say, wow, the truth is that, yeah, this really sucks. This is bad. I don't, the truth is that I would rather not be experiencing this. I know I have to, and I know I am, but also the truth is that this is really painful, and I wish it weren't happening. Not with the expectation that saying that is going to make something happen, but just to open up that space again of what is really happening. And as I often try and reflect that even if it's not something pleasant, that just seeing it for what it is, that will lead to some sort of freedom. That really recognizing and acknowledging the truth has the potential to help set us free, whatever it is. Even if it's admitting to confusion, and sometimes even just reflecting, I don't know. What's the answer to this problem? How can it be resolved? What should have been done differently? I don't know. That's the truth. I have no idea. What does it feel like to be unable to come up with an answer? Because oftentimes we just torment ourselves trying to figure something out, trying to get a scenario, trying to rewrite something that will make us feel better in terms of a storyline. But that's not getting at the heart of it. Getting at the heart of it is just feeling the actual feeling and letting oneself experience it, and not trying to come up with anything conceptual to try and explain it or make it better. And with that direct seeing, that direct experience through that kind of questioning, that what is the truth now, on a real deep level, then that's where the suffering can be touched and released. And then the thoughts don't matter so much, the concepts don't matter so much. The stories are just stories. Just a couple hours ago, I was talking with Yatiko also about how he was doing 5 years after Glenn's suicide. And I myself was remembering the first few months afterwards. And I had met Glenn a couple of times, I think, at least once, maybe twice, and didn't know him well, but the impact of his suicide was strong enough for me that I had some recurring dreams of him. And I could only imagine, what might Yatiko had been going through. And then he and I met up in Sri Lanka a few months later, spent a bit of time there, a couple of months there, and just, experiencing together the ups and downs of that period of time, and the memories and the difficulties and the times trying to move on, let go, and it's still persisting. And anyway, I was asking him today how 5 years later things look, and he was saying that really actually in the past couple of years he feels quite at peace with the whole thing. And was sort of just asking a little bit about what that process involved. And I hope I get this right. That he was just saying that there was a very strong tendency the first, I guess, couple of years or so to not like not wanting to let it go, not wanting to hold on to the pain or the difficulty or the confusion. Just not only not ready to, but just not wanting to, and not wanting to feel better, and kind of exploring that a little bit, and realizing that his insight, I think, is that there is a sort of level of attachment to things that are almost unjustifiable or unresolvable, in a way that feels like you're honoring the other person or the situation, and that to let go of it is in some way dishonoring that whole memory, that whole event. That moving on is something that isn't something that should be done, and realizing that it's okay to feel good, it's okay to let go, it's okay to be at peace with something like that, and that there's no benefit or purpose, and it's not a dishonor to let go of something so strongly like that. And that really the past couple of years have been not filled with difficult memories. Just sometimes things come up and a sense of what sounds like, healthy poignancy comes to mind, but not a sense of personal anger, regret, confusion. And it's that kind of honest self-reflection and willingness to just go through it and be with whatever comes up that I think helps one, as it clearly has worked for him. And I think, also just for myself, trying to repetitively recognize and look at a bigger picture, the broader perspective, that there have been, in the past, there have been times that have been better, there have been times that have been worse. In the future, there will be times that are better, and there will be times that will be worse. And that really, this is life in the human realm. samsara keeps rolling on, and we can do all sorts of things to make things more skillful and better, and we should. And then other influences come into play, and things take a turn for the worse. Our lives take a dip. The world goes into some sort of difficult era or period. And it just goes through these kinds of cycles over and over again, uh, as it has for an inconceivable amount of time. That phrase, that a reflection that keeps coming up always, is that samsara is without a discoverable beginning. From a undiscernible first point, beings have been roaming and wandering on, uh, obstructed by ignorance, fettered by craving. And just realizing that, that's inevitable. These difficult situations will arise and they'll pass away, and that really the long-term solution is for us to go very deep and to realize how we individually can transcend and move uh, beyond the samsaric ways, and then the contribution we can make to the world is to just share that in ways that seem most appropriate to help others along the way, in whatever way we've learned to. And that's really the very best we can do, and that is no small task. Um, and that's, where the Buddhist teachings really can give hope, not only pointing out the uncontrollability and inevitability of these cycles, but also that there is a way to work through them, work beyond them, transcend them, to a point where we don't have to engage in the whole cycle anymore. That there is a solution to the problem, and we can realize it individually for ourselves. In fact, we have to realize it individually, and then share it in any possible way we can to the best of our individual capabilities. And for that, we can have a tremendous amount of faith and gratitude towards the teachings, towards what the Buddha discovered, rediscovered, and taught, to the point where it's still apparent. The teachings are still apparent here, more than 2,500 years later. And it really just comes back down to the Four Noble Truths, um, having to really fully understand, fully penetrate the cause, or the fact of dukkha, the fact of unsatisfactoriness, the fact that things uh, aren't the way we want them to be much of the time, and that there's two kinds. There's the kind that of the natural causes and conditions that are difficult and hard to work with, hard to bear, like these uncontrollable situations, these unresolvable things. They arise due to causes and conditions. But the other kind of dukkha that we can be freed from is how we respond, the mental response to whether we pick them up and hold on to them in a way that results in more suffering, or whether we pick them up for consideration, clearly see them without bias, and understand them to the point where we see their cause, the second noble truth, where we see the level of our attachment, our clinging, our holding on to, our resistance to the way things are, our mental drive for release and pleasure in the realm of senses or the realm of being, And that constant enmeshment in trying to force a reality to be different, this cause of suffering, and how to gradually develop a path towards abandoning that cause of the suffering, to letting go of that craving and clinging, that holding onto old ways, old patterns, and realizing that in this path there's a very clearly designated way of understanding how to do that, how to let go. And that the result of following that Eightfold Path is the promise of really a true and complete release from the round of samsara, the repetitive involvement in the realm of suffering. And really wholly committing ourselves to the Eightfold Path, because really, certainly the older I get, the more I realize, there's not a lot of time to waste in this lifetime. If I, want to really make a concerted effort, then time is short. And taking those opportunities when we get a very strong wake-up call from something that's a sudden tragedy or a sudden difficulty or an unexplainable issue that comes up that drives us into acute grief, then rising up to that occasion and allowing that energy and that impetus to really take hold and propel what we do with the rest of our lives. So we pick up the training, we pick up the wholeheartedly with that wish and that drive to really see a long-term solution and realize that we've got this very precious opportunity as a human being with all of the faculties, with the right supports, the people around us who want to support us doing this. And we take advantage of that, we pick that up, and we hold on to that. We do cling to that. This is one form of clinging that's good, to pick up this path until we've completed it, at which point we can let it, we will let it go then, naturally. But this is as the sutta is often translated, one fortunate attachment that we can develop, that of developing the path. So just thinking about all these difficulties and trying to, it's kind of, again, a bit of a cliche, but trying to turn these difficult situations that we find ourselves in into opportunities rather than letting them drag us down, rather than let us sink. See if we can use them to rise up, whether we're monastics and going through difficult times, having troubles with the practice, with the life, whether we're in the world as a householder, layperson, having the same kinds of struggles in a different way. We take these difficult times as fertilizer and pick up on them and say, this is something I can use to help wake me up and to help me develop the energy and the interest and the motivation to see this path through to completion. And the faith-inspiring message from the Buddhas is that as human beings we have that capacity, and every one of us here in this room has that capacity, and we must realize that to some extent, or else we wouldn't be here today to come and practice together and to listen and to reflect. So I just leave that there and offer that for this afternoon's reflection.
Sadhu, sadhu.